Hey, this is Miss V, and this is the next unit. This is World History, and we're talking today about African society and culture. So in this unit, we're getting into the African empires and also the Mesoamerican empires, and also the South American empires. But this time we're going to focus on the African societies or the African empires. So let's get started. All right, so for this unit, I'm hoping that you are able to trace the growth of major sub-Saharan African kingdoms and empires. Okay, that's the focus. But what I want you to really focus on is the essential question and answering or being able to answer this essential question. How did geography affect early African society, culture, and trade? Because that's a big thing. It really did affect it. And we'll see how. And that's the point that you have to read, how it did. All right, so these are your definitions: plateau, savanna, matrilineal societies, patrilineal societies, divanire, and a griot. Okay, so make sure that you have those vocabulary in your guided notes. All right. So the geography of Africa is very diverse. First of all, we have the Sahara Desert. That covers about a whole quarter of the African continent. At one point, it was fertile and there was enough water and so forth, but because of the changing wind patterns and weather, it has become dry and very barren, and it's increasing. The Sahara Desert is not diminishing, it's increasing. So that can become a big problem for the continent in future years if we don't pay attention to the climate, right? All right, this is the Sahel, and this is that region here. It's an how can we say ecoclimate, or a certain region that's climatary, that is very sparse. As you see here, it goes from one end of the continent to the other, and it has a lot of harsh drought that may last for years. And it's definitely causing problems because, again, this is across the Sahara Desert, and it's causing desertification, which means that the Sahara Desert is becoming bigger, like I mentioned, and not diminishing. So if that happens, of course, there's a lack of water, there's a lack of food, and that's not going to be good for the inhabitants that live there, or the people that live there, right? And the animals. So a plateau is a relatively high flat land area, and there's a lot of plateaus that are in the African continent, especially in the southern or the central part of Africa and the southern parts of Africa. Okay, and that too affects how African societies had their culture, their society, and also how they traded, definitely. All right, so this is the savannah. So if you watch The Lion King, I'm sure everybody watched The Lion King, right? The Lion King was held in the savannas, okay? And this is dry grassland. There's a few trees, thorny bushes, and farmers are usually able to grow certain grains such as sorghum, millet, and rice. Okay, and also in the savannas is where most people and tribes, they herd their cattle. Okay, this is where they do cattle raising and so forth. All right, this is the tropical rainforest. And the tropical rainforest, as you see here, this is in the southern part, the central part of Africa. Okay, and it's a lot of dense, tangled trees, tall trees, that goes, way up, very, very high. And they try to extend their height to get the sunlight, but also because there's so many animals, there's so many plants varieties, there's tons of varieties of different plants and animals in this area. It also is a breeding ground for insects that carry very deadly diseases such as malaria, okay, which is a big issue that has happened in that region of Africa. All right, so this is slide 8. So if you're on this part, we are looking at question 5 and question 6, but question 6 is going to be on the next slide, and I'm going to help you out with that part. Okay. So question 5 asks, what makes up oral traditions? Okay, and oral traditions are usually made up of stories, songs, and poems. Now, in African societies, in terms of culture, some tribes, some communities did have written languages, but it wasn't used primarily as their language. Most of the time, it was orally done. They didn't use written language as much. Some did have written languages, but it wasn't as prominent as oral language or oral traditions, such as stories, songs, and poems. And there was a special group of that would serve as the storytellers, and those were called the griot. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So that answers your question for number 5. All right. Now number 6. This is answering your question for number 6. Okay. The question is, why is a griot important to African societies? In the African societies, and that's throughout Africa, griots were known as the oral historians and the genealogists, and they kept the history of the tribe or that community alive. So they can remember the history and the genealogy. Genealogy is the lineage of heritage. In other words, who's your mother, who's the father, who was the father's father, who was the grandfather, the great, 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 great grandfather, and so on and so on. And they can remember those people for thousands of years. And the way they remember that is through storytelling. They did that through songs, and they also did that through poems. So one of those stories is talking about the king of Mali, Mansa Musa. And then also, if you ever heard about the stories of Anansi the spider, a lot of those stories come from those oral traditions, and they tell about the history of certain tribes as well. So you may want to check out the Anansi the spider and see those stories. All right, so let's move on. All right, so the next slide this is on slide 9, and this is answering question number 7, the difference between matrilineal and patrilineal society. Again, you have the vocabulary, but here you're going to determine what's the difference between one. Matri, of course, means mother, so that's maternal, okay? So that's tracing your ancestry through your mother. Most societies in Africa were based on matrilineal societies. So their heritage was traced through the mother, and therefore property and homes and so forth was traced down or passed down through the mother, not the father, but the mother. And that was in African societies. In most European and other societies are patrilineal, which traces your ancestry through your father. So that goes, heritage, inheritance, and so forth is passed through the father, right, and the sons. But in African society, it's different. It's passed through the mother and the daughters, okay? All right. So this is the next one, number 8. Here you have to find some differences between the houses of men and the houses of women. In African societies, especially in tribes, West Africa, South Africa, etc., many of the communities were based around the woman, okay? And the homes were owned by the women, okay? So the women would care for the home, they would work in the fields, and then their job was to be good wives and mothers, raise the community, raise the children, and so forth, while the men would go out and hunt and fish and bring food for their families, okay? And they would have to bring them to the home or the community to share, or they would bring it to that small tribe or that small based community to make sure that the community is surviving in the natural world, okay? Now, boys and girls, of course, they didn't necessarily have school, but their schooling was going through this ceremony or what they call rites of passage to become adults, okay? And you'll see that later when we talk about these rites of passages later on in some other units. All right, so religious beliefs vary from place to place in African traditions. Most African societies did believe in a single creator, or they were monotheistic. However, there are many African religious beliefs or traditional religious beliefs that are polytheistic, meaning that there are many gods, but they did believe in a single creator God that created things, okay? And that's the most common thing that most African societies share. All right, and most had rituals, okay? And as a matter of fact, a lot of the rituals that you see in modern day church, such as, Pentecostals or Baptists or what have you, a lot of those rituals come from African traditions. And those were ways to communicate with the gods or God, okay? So in this case, you had diviners. And diviners were those people who believed they were supernatural, and they were able to get that supernatural communication with the gods or God to be able to foretell events. So something like fortune tellers or soothsayers, as they will call them, okay? Another key important thing, and it's still important to this day, is that they would use in their religion, communication with your ancestry was extremely important, and it was your ancestor that would help you to communicate with the god or gods, okay? However, when Islam, the Islamic caliphates that we talked about before, when those Islamic caliphates started to spread Islam, that challenged these traditional beliefs or these traditional religions in Africa, and now those were being replaced with Christianity and Islam. But not all tribes succumbed, or I wouldn't say succumbed, but not all tribes converted to Christianity and Islam. A lot of them did retain their traditional beliefs, or a lot of them even merged their traditional beliefs in with these new religions that they encountered. All right, awesome. So your job here is to look at these. There's some wood carvings, okay, that's gonna come up. And this will be your answer for slide 12, on question 12. And you're going to see what these wood carvings represent. And there's an example here with the Ife. And these wood carvings, again, they did art to reflect their society and their beliefs, just like we do, okay? Representing gods, the spirits, the ancestors, women in the community, children, etc. Okay, very much so about that women or community type thing or community type ideal. They would look towards that. So anything along those lines, that's how the art was represented. Okay, gods, spirits, ancestral figures, women, and children. Okay, and as you see here, this would be a prime example of those types of artistic work and carvings. As you see here, this one is the Ife tribe, which was made of bronze. Okay, so again, for the last part, you're going to label the map of Africa with the Sahara Desert, the Sahel, Savannah, tropical rainforest, the Nile River, and Lake Victoria. Here's a quick tip: the Nile River does not flow downward; it flows up. Okay, so if you found that interesting, if you understand all of this, awesome. I will see you in